Welcome into the PFF podcast. Steve Palazzolo here along with Sam Monson, and we are back to rehash the history of PFF. It's an entire series this spring and summer. If you didn't hear last week's episode, be sure to check it out. Sam and I went back and we went through our entry into the company, a little bit of the backstory, and today we start to go around the company a little, hitting on all of the key figures, the key pieces that made the company grow, and no more important key figure than Neal Hornsby, the Godfather of PFF, the founder of PFF. So I went back and interviewed Neal to kind of get his story on the entire progression of the company, the start, the growth, the Chris Collinsworth era, all of it in a very fun interview. So Sam, what'd you think? Neal, what any key stories? What's the key part with Neal here? Because he's like he's the guy, he's the Godfather.
Yeah, well, this is the guy to start it with because he's the one that can go all the way back. Me, I can go back to 2008, you can go back to 2010. But Neal's the guy that started this. He was the guy with the crazy idea way back when. He was the guy with too much time in his hands, too much inclination to fire up a spreadsheet. And, he can give you the entire history of how this crazy idea started and how it all started rolling when the first NFL team came calling, when Chris Collinsworth came calling. So, yeah, this is the guy to really listen to how this all started and started growing.
Yeah, so we will get into why he started it, how he turned a hobby into all of our full-time jobs now, how Chris Collinsworth got involved, though, as he admits, Chris has a little better story. Chris is a little bit better of a storyteller when it comes to how he did get involved, and that's why Chris will be interviewed as part of this series. So, again, we're having a lot of fun with this whole thing. We appreciate all of the feedback we've been getting. If you guys are enjoying what you're hearing, be sure to give us the old 5-star review, because that's how you spread the word on the PFF podcast. We are breaking records every single month, and we owe it all to our listeners. So we really appreciate all of the feedback, and we hope you enjoy this, kind of run down memory lane and the history of PFF. So without further ado, here is my interview with Neal Hornsby. And I am here with the Godfather of PFF, Neal Hornsby. Is that a proper nickname? The Godfather?
It's a Jack Farrell thing.
Well, Jack Farrell does all the nicknames around here. So if it's good enough for Jack, it's good enough for me. The Godfather, the founder of PFF, Neal Hornsby, formerly of England, now a Cincinnati, and what are we right now?
I think we are Cincinnatians.
Cincinnatians. He dragged me over here. He got dragged over here by our new boss, Chris Collinsworth. But we're going to go way back and dive into just how this whole thing started. It was Neal. It was overseas. And I've got a list of questions. The first question being, what were you thinking? What spurred this whole thing? Why does PFF exist? Like, where did it come from? Give a little background as to your history with football, why you loved it so much, and why we are here where we are today.
I love football. I've really always loved football. Back from 1983, there was a new TV station in the UK. There'd only been 3 up till then, and they brought a new one out, Channel 4. Very novel. And they were desperate for content. They were desperate for new content, so they put on an hour show of the NFL, and it was a week delayed, and they had one game that they promoted, and then there was highlights from all the other games, very short highlights from all the other games. And it was a week delayed, and it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic, and I loved it. But the problem was, at that stage, you then got into, well, by the way that the highlight started, by the fact it was cut down to a game to about 40 minutes, you knew what was going to happen. So that wasn't a lot of fun, and you'd heard the results. And so then I started listening to Armed Forces Network, and that would be from sort of 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, which is when the game started in the UK, all the way through, if you were listening to the Monday night football game. I was a big Dolphins fan in those days.
Marino, right?
Well, that was it. In 1999, when Marino retired, I realised I was a Dan Marino fan and not a Dolphins fan, so I apologise to all Dolphins fans.
My Jaguars sent him home with the 62-7 loss back in '99.
Yeah, that was not his proudest moment.
One of Mark Brunell's proudest moments.
Yeah, well, it was indeed. And I just got more and more into it. So really, Pro Football Focus started as a hobby. It was always a hobby. It was never intended to be anything more than just a hobby. I was a business consultancy firm back in the UK. I was doing quite well, and it was just an expensive hobby. I was paying a guy called John McAlinden, who was a guy who worked for me on my full-time gig as a business consultant. He was a hardware guy. And then it became Ian Perks. Ian, who has also moved to Cincinnati and we know and love, who's our CTO now.
I mentioned on the intro pod, we'll get Ian on the podcast because his story is a fascinating one, even if it's only 10 minutes, the fact that he still knows very little to nothing about football, and he's kind of like the guy that makes this whole operation tick. So we will get to interview Ian.
So I was paying Ian probably about 20% of his normal day rate to do what he was doing for me. And it was just an expensive hobby, and I loved it. And the problem is, with most things that you love, the passion grows, and you're trying to get and find more ways to do more games, to go deeper. And we were just moving along. We'd sort of aimed the product at high-end fans. That was really where we were going. And then I think things changed, really substantially changed. In 2009, we promised ourselves, it was about week 3 of the 2009 season, and we'd promised ourselves that we would try to get to the bye week and do all of the games before the next week started. Given the fact that we finished games...
With how many people?
Well, about 4 or 5, 6 maybe. Given the fact we finished games about 10 minutes after they finished now, it's ridiculous to think back that we were struggling to finish them on a Saturday. But we'd promised ourselves we were going to work all night, all day. 18-hour days were fairly standard for most people in those days.
Still are sometimes.
Yeah. And it was after week 3, and I got an email through. We were having one of those contact us forms where people can, just write on the contact us form, please, can you? And there was a contact us from a guy purporting to be John Berger, the Director of Football Information for the New York Giants. And I didn't believe it. I just thought it was somebody... one of my friends having a fairly intellectual joke. They'd gone to a lot of trouble to set this whole thing up. Number one, figuring out that there was a guy from the New York Giants.
Who the actual analytics guy was.
Yeah, who the actual analytics guy was.
Let me pause for a second, because I want to get to the Giants and that first contact. Where were we from a timeline standpoint? When was the first... When did the site start? When did you actually start putting stuff on a site? And even before that, what made you say, I'm going to grade every player on every play?
Okay.
Because you described you were a football fan that watched some highlights, and it evolved pretty quick to, I'm just going to grade every player on every play.
Okay. I have missed out a fairly big chunk, and it was a
We'll get to all of it. We have all day here. We'll get to all of it.
I was not wishing to bore our listeners, but... Back in 1990, I got my first computer, and I've always been a bit of a geek. And I decided to build a football database. And I was going to have every player in this football database. There was going to be every transaction that there was ever done.
You don't do things small scale?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't. I've always been somebody who sets somewhat stretching targets.
That's what I've learned that through the years. I feel like we've all learned that through the years. You weren't just going to do one team. You weren't just going to do a couple stats. You were going to do every last one of them.
That's right.
Great.
And 1990, I started that process. 13 years later, I was maybe about 6 months to a year from putting this new website live, this new football website that nobody had ever seen before. And in 2003, I was trawling the internet, and as people did in those days, and on the modem. And I came across a site called Pro Football Reference, and it was awesome. It was truly awesome. But they'd done everything I'd spent. They were just clearly smarter than I was.
They were way ahead of your 13 years of work.
They were. I probably don't think they'd spent 13 years doing it. They'd just done it in a really smart way. And as you can imagine, there was a few curse words. There was a few, that's 13 years worth of effort down the toilet type mentality. And I was a little bit depressed for a few days, should we say. And then, as I normally do, bounce back with the idea. I always say I've never had a good idea in my life. I've stolen millions, but I've never had one good one. But my next idea, or stolen idea, was I'd always been a big fan of Paul Zimmerman. I make no bones about this. I've written for Peter King on Monday Morning Quarterback a number of times about
Dr. Z from Sports Illustrated.
Correct. And he had always been, in my opinion, he was the guy that I read the most, that I had the most time for, because you could tell from what he'd done, he'd actually watched the games.
Right.
He'd actually dug in, and he would say things like his all-pro team was not the same as everybody else's. You know, if you've gone in and done the work, you don't expect it to be the same as what everybody else is saying.
Right.
You know, and he could go in and he could give you chapter and verse on why he hadn't chosen people who other people had chosen and why he had chosen people that other people hadn't. I've seen 8 games from this guy. He was really good in this game and this game. He destroyed this particular player, and he was fantastic. And I always thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to take that to the next level and do every single player on every single player? Because Paul was one man. Paul was just one man doing this. So I felt, well, if you had 2 or 3 people, maybe you could do the whole
Just
league.
2 or 3 people, that's all you needed?
Well, that was my stupid notion at the time. I've always maybe...
It worked for a little bit.
It worked for a little bit. And that was where we started. So we got 2 or 3 people and went from there. And we started grading everybody on every game. And I listened to the last podcast that you did, which was excellent, by the way, Steve.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the promotion there.
Yeah, excellent. Let's have some nepotism in this, if nothing else.
Be sure to go back and listen to part 1. It was Sam and I just kind of giving our take on how I entered the company, how Sam entered the company, and a little bit of the backstory that leads into everything Neil's telling you right now.
And the character assassination of me that started,
No assassination. It was all truths, We just described your style as a boss.
Which
has gotten us to this point, which is great, right?
which is the most positive thing you can say about it. But
we're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll mould me into the boss you want me to be before very much longer.
Someday.
Yeah, someday. We were in this place whereby we were doing, games, and we were bringing in tape. I remember DVDs. We had this whole copying DVD type thing in the UK because it was the only way you could get the games. And I had 2004, and I started grading them myself in 2004. And then in 2005, I started building stuff with John McAlinden, as I said. We then found Ian about 2006, and he became clearly a pattern. John's a fantastic back-end hardware guy. If you need somebody to set up all of your environment, is as good as it gets. But he really didn't have the coding skills that Ian did. And then Ian came on board, who's just an immensely talented guy.
Yep.
He's, I used to run an enterprise development center in the UK. I had 140 developers working for me, and there were some really talented guys. But Ian was a very junior guy in those days, and he was already in the top 10 of people at that place, and he was phenomenal. And he's always been phenomenal. And he came in, and he's just got this knack for being able to listen to something and construct it, even if it's something that he doesn't understand, football.
And so that's one of my questions.
Yeah.
Because you're pretty detail oriented.
Mm-hmm.
as you said, he can listen and understand. How did those conversations go? You had to teach him football from scratch, right? I mean, he doesn't know a thing at this time. Now he knows a little bit.
Yeah.
He knows that there's 11 players on each side of the field, and he knows that Jimmy Graham's a tight end. I think that's where we are.
Do you think?
Yeah,
I
think that's his favorite player, and I can't wait to ask him. He knows a handful of players. It's usually the guys he has to deal with when he's going back through the database.
Has he ever watched a game all the way through?
Yeah, didn't we have him try to grade a quarter of...
That's not watching a game all the way through.
All the way through? No, I don't think he's made it all the way through.
Okay.
But maybe next year we'll really sit him down.
But
that's the guy that fuels PFF.
Ian's fantastic.
But how did you communicate to him? It still boggles my mind.
So what I used to do was I used to put everything into an Excel spreadsheet and draw up the diagram of it's a wireframe, what in development terms you call a wireframe. I would wireframe stuff in Excel. I would put the formulas that drove the numbers that I needed in there, and I would say, like this. And then we'd be on Skype. He talked about Skype on the last podcast.
The Office.
Yeah, we'd Skype backwards and forwards, and I'd show him the wireframe. He'd give me his view of what that should be in code. I would then pull it up on my screen, and I would say a little bit less of this, a little bit more of this. No, this needs to be this formula, and we would go backwards and forwards, and we would iterate. And the great thing about Ian, though, is he very rarely makes a mistake. You don't need that much iteration. He is really good at understanding. When you've done a wireframe, you're going to make mistakes. It's a fairly detailed thing. And Ian's very good at understanding when you've made a mistake and asking you the right question, and when he's delivered something and he's made the mistake, which is very, very rare, finding a mistake from Perksy. So just a tremendous guy who was able to take those wireframes in a very, very fast fashion and turn them round. And between us, we would just iterate backwards and forwards to get to where we needed to be.
Let's go back to the grading process. You said you sat down, you just started grading games in 2004. How did this system come about? I know Ben, we'll get to, Ben Stockwell was involved in evolving it and everything. Where did you come up with +2, -2? Who started all of that? Because I don't even know if I know some of these answers.
So that was me. I started with the Paul Zimmerman thing, Paul described his process, which was just literally a plus or a minus. He wasn't getting down to that level of detail, but it became immediately a pattern that there was a difference between a slight win and a significant win.
Right.
There's a huge difference between blowing a guy 10 yards off the ball and the advantage that gives you as to just turning your guy and giving you a slight advantage. So I felt there needed to be a graduation on the scale. I can't remember for the life of me. I probably started off with a 1 and a 2 and a -1 and a -2, and then realised I needed some graduations in between that.
Right.
Hence why it's at that level. But that was it. It was just making stuff up. Sometimes you just got to. It's the stuff that
making stuff up. People accuse us of that quite a bit, but we're beyond that point.
The truth of the matter is, what I always said was everything that we did had to be auditable down to the individual player.
Right.
And it reminds me of that thing that we did with Paul Alexander last year, whereby he went through and was able to look at his offensive linemen, pick the 600 negative players, and disagreed with 12 on his linemen.
So that's Paul Alexander, the offensive line coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, has access to the data. And you can see, I think the video is on YouTube somewhere, where he said, 600 plays, he compared his offensive linemen, all the negatives that we pulled out, and said he disagreed with 12 of them.
12.
That is... I think that's a respectable number.
And that's the whole point. I always wanted it to be auditable.
Right.
It had to be audible. Somebody had to be able to go back to the play and either agree with it or disagree with it. It couldn't be some amorphous number that somebody had just thrown up out of the air and, licked their finger, felt which way the wind was going and said, feels like it's an 86 out of 100. I mean, what's that?
Right.
I mean, that's just crap, isn't it? I mean, you have to be able to go back to the individual player level and say, on that play, show it to a coach, say, that's how I graded that guy. Do you agree or disagree?
And we do that often now in
that's
meetings,
exactly what
and we
do.
sit down with coaches and say, let us know where you agree. And I'd say one of the biggest things where we agree or disagree is sometimes in just how we weigh, because we have a scale of wins and losses, like you said. It's how we weigh it maybe versus how the coach weighs it. And I've actually seen coaches being more biased toward their guy because they'll say, we can't expect our guy, this guy, he's a 6th-round pick. We can't expect him to make that block. But you made the scale, in all of our handbooks, you said, I don't care if it's Barry Sanders. I don't care if it's Jonathan Ogden. I don't care if it's Anthony Munoz. Everybody's the same. Treat them the same, and then we can go back and sort through who it was against and, the challenge, how difficult the block was and all that stuff. But treat everybody the same, because a lot of times coaches are like, it's my fault. I can't ask this guy to make this difficult block. But we'll say, no, that's a negative if you just didn't get the job done.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the chat room in the other podcasts. Where do Ben, Stockwell, Khaled, Sam, where do all these guys come into play? And then we'll start getting into where the websites really started evolving.
Yeah, so the first person from a football perspective to come on board was Ben Stockwell, our Director of Analytics. And Ben has just been phenomenal. I can't believe that anybody has done as much work in a shorter period of time as Ben's done. He consistently is just a workaholic, and he has a really process mindset for getting this stuff done. And Ben was able to take the bits and pieces that I put in as broad brush, and that's been the beauty of Pro Football Focus, is that I start something, but all the guys then take it and just make things so much better than I ever envisaged. Ben was able to take the grading process and make it to the stage that Paul Alexander will come in and say he disagrees with 12. That we can bring coaches from all over the country into our office, sit them down with our process, and after half an hour they understand it, and we can have a discourse, and they understand why we do what we do. But Ben has done that.
And that's what we're doing this weekend. Ben's actually, right now, flying over. We're going to have a 2-day workshop, essentially, with NFL coaches where Ben's going to teach them how we grade football. We did this last year with Pro Coaches Network, and they did the checks on all of our grades. So, it's certainly evolved quite a bit with Ben taking the reins.
Yeah. It's always the thing about Pro Football. We've always said we have a mantra of continuous improvement. That's in everything we do. That's really what it's all been about. And it's been about people taking something that's just a nascent idea and really then taking that up to new levels. And I've always said, whatever we do, I don't care where we are now. Where we are now is irrelevant. I think we're in a fairly good place, but even if we're not in a good place, if we get better every single day, if we're putting processes in which allow us to get better, then before very long, we're incredibly good. And that's been the process all the way through.
Continued improvement every single year. So Ben comes in, he kind of takes over the analysis process. Can you describe Khaled and his role in this whole thing? Is he a small part of this whole deal, or
I'd like to say a small part, but I think if there's been one person that was really fundamental to us being where we are now, it would be Khaled, because Khaled is how do I describe Khaled? Khaled is a guy who came in, and the first thing that's interesting about Khaled was I asked him to get on board, and he tried to do player participation the very first time, and he phoned me a day later, or he got me on Skype, or did whatever we did, or sent me an email and said, I can't do this, I'm not doing this. It's just, this is stupid.
Oh, he's a quitter. I'm going to hold that one against him. I didn't know he was a quitter.
This is just too difficult. So I let that lie, and I moved on. And then I tried him again. I don't know, it was a couple of months later or something. I said, oh, come on, you can do this, come on. And then Khaled is the guy now that is the fastest, one of the most accurate. He will work at a level that I just find is impossible for somebody to work at. He's the guy that set the standard for everybody else to follow within Pro Football Focus, because I was never going to be that guy. I was never going to be the guy who was going to be quick enough or smart enough or, just had that unbelievable ability to work hard consistently. And he's had a process mindset. He's smart. He's one of the lucky thing in Pro Football Focus has just been finding these guys who are just prepared to subsume themselves to the greater good. And these are guys who in other fields could have gone on to be superstars. And they are superstars within the Pro Football Focus environment. But the real thing about PFF that I love more than anything else is everybody subsumes themselves to the brand. It's everything is Pro Football Focus first and them second. And that's the thing that Khaled has always been about. He has always been about a guy who's prepared to work and put the PFF first and the customers first and him second, whatever the cost. And he's driven the whole of the data process that we have. Everything about it. When he got too much for me, I used to do the data process. Khaled took it off me and took it to the next level. Just like Ben took the analysis process to the next level, Khaled took the data process, the data acquisition process to the next level. And when we designed our new data acquisition tool last year, he was the product manager for that and did a sensational job.
So you touched on a point. How do you get talented people like Ben, like Kay, like me, now mostly those guys, the early years.
Yeah.
How do you get those talented guys to buy into your hobby? It was your hobby. And these guys completely bought in. They were just out of college or, a couple of years removed from college. And they completely bought into your hobby, which of course became all of our, full-time jobs. But what kind of Kool-Aid were you serving back there in 2008 or so?
Well, the only one I really needed to persuade was Ian.
Yeah.
Because Ian was the only one who wasn't interested. This is football. This is a hobby for all of us, Steve.
Of course.
We all love football. It's the reason that I always look at it and say people have three things in life, really. Four things if you include sleep, which we tend not to. We don't include that. We don't include that very often.
But secret sauce.
But you've got like family time, and then you've got work time, and then you've got hobby time. You know what I mean? Things to go off and, some people go off and they fish or they build little models or they do whatever they do, crochet. I don't know. Our hobby's football, but our work's football. So how can you not love something that's your hobby? How can you not work hard at your hobby? So I don't think there was ever any problem from that perspective. I think it was only ever finding the right people, because the crucial thing about PFF is we have found the right people all the way through. It's the only one thing that I've ever been any good at, really. I've stolen ideas from people, but the one thing that I will give myself credit for a little bit is being able to understand who is going to be good for the business and spotting talent.
Right.
That's the one thing that I know I'm pretty good at. I'm good at being able to spot people and understand what their skill set is and be able to fit them into the right part of the business to allow them to do really great work. Khaled's also very good at that as well, and that's been the beauty. Listen, it's easy. Pro Football Focus is easy to run when you've got as talented a group of people as we've got, and I do include you in that, Steve.
Oh, thank you.
Do include you in that. I
appreciate that. I'm just here for the ego stroke. That's why we invited Neal on the podcast, to stroke the ego, so thank you. It has been fun watching that whole deal evolve. And so let's go back to some of those early years. You've got 2008. We talked with Sam about it. 2008 was the first year. I think Ben Ben finished the games right before the 2009 season started.
Correct.
2009 starts. You're trying to go live with it and everything. That's when I became a fan of the site. Everything's free in 2009. And I'm using it, and the player participation stuff's out there, and it's really great stuff. 2010 was the first year, we talked about it with Sam, that we started to try to charge people like me for some of this data. I sent you some hate mail back in 2010 from my old AOL account. I can't wait to dig that up somewhere about my, the hate mail that I sent Neal, because all I wanted was my free PFF data. But what went into some of that decision? Of course, we had to make a similar move a couple of years ago that we'll talk about briefly as well. But what went into the decision? You needed to start trying to make money and, actually bring something in for all the money that you've put up for the entire hobby.
I don't have to make that back. It's a hobby. You don't expect to get money back from a hobby. That wasn't the point. The point was that we were at a stage whereby Sam and Ben had come on board. Carl had another job, so this was the beauty of Carl. Carl would go and do his job. We'd do 40 hours worth of work and then come home and do 50 hours worth of work.
It's crazy.
It was insane. But Ben and Sam didn't have jobs. And the truth of the matter was, I was just paying them out of my own pocket. But there came a time I looked at the bill for the month, and it was like thousands and thousands of dollars. That was what was going out.
Right.
And I knew that was unsustainable, and I knew my wife would at some stage start to say...
It's a really expensive hobby.
This is a really expensive hobby. This is, even if you'd chosen to try and go to Mars, you might not, it might not be quite as expensive as this. So we realised that it was unsustainable in the long run. And we just needed to try and break, I didn't mind putting a bit in, but I couldn't continue to put that amount of money in. So we just wanted to try and break even. And we just decided that the right way to do that was to charge people for some of the data. Now, I know that you're a socialist, Steve, and I know that's a dirty word in the US, but, we live in a capitalist society, and people should be allowed, I think, just to make a little bit of money for the work, for the hard effort and grind that they put in. I know you don't believe that.
Well, I believe it now because I'm on the other side of it. But at the time, I was a poor minor league baseball pitcher that just wanted to read about football and get the best football information for free.
Yeah.
But I understand the move.
Yeah.
I understand the move. And so that's about 2010 that happens. You had mentioned 2009, though. We'll talk about the NFL a little bit. 2009, you get this email that you thought was fake from John Berger of the New York Giants. So that was pretty much the first time an NFL team got involved here?
And that was crucial because it gave us the momentum to realize that we were doing something that nobody ever done. I just assumed that the NFL were doing everything that we were doing. I just assumed that was something that they would do themselves and then not give out to anybody. But as fans, we could come up with this data as well, and we could then really engender a discourse with high-end fans, and that was really what it was about. You're a guy in the UK and nobody wants to talk to you about football. You know, all they want to talk about is soccer. I have no interest in soccer at all. All I want to do is talk about football. I want to talk to it with people, intelligent people in the US who are interested in football at a very high level. So I thought the best way to do that was to do this. But then when we find out that we've even potentially gone above them and missed our target, but in a good way, and gone to an NFL level, I'm somewhat shocked. And John, who is a good friend and who has been tremendously supportive of what we've done, I'd like to think we've provided him with a very good service as well. So it's been very reciprocal. Came on board and said, look, I've seen this stuff, and you guys just need to know where you're getting the all-22 footage from. And I said, well, we're not getting the all-22 footage. He said, oh, come on. I'm not going to tell anybody, but just tell us where you're getting the all-22 footage from. And I said, well, honestly, John, we're not. We're doing this off broadcast. He said, well, you can't be. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, my interns with the all-22 footage aren't as accurate as your guys are off broadcast. And
we explained that on the podcast. That comes down to process, right? Because we did it twice, and we compared one versus the other, and then you get guys like Nathan in the company who can rattle off the armbands and the ankle tape of every single player in the NFL off the top of his head. Those are the types of crazy people that we hired to make sure that we did that extremely accurately.
Honestly, I used to be, my proudest thing in my life at one stage was I was the most accurate PP analyst we had. and then...
Lifelong goal. Do you have a plaque on your wall still?
Well, I wish I did. And then Khaled came along and took away all of my toys. He came away in a very nice way and said, "Boss, we're going to stop you from doing..." Well, he wouldn't say boss, he would say Neal or hoy you or whatever he was, because he's the last thing he's ever going to do is call me boss.
No respect.
No respect at all. So he said, "We've decided you're not doing any more analysis or any more PP." And I'm saying, "But I'm the most accurate person you've got." Too slow. Too slow.
That was always an issue, and I'm on the slow side too, but I think you took a little bit more heat than I did for taking your time.
I think they just wanted me out of it, personally. I just think they wanted to be able to have other people being more accurate.
That's certainly possible. So we pushed you out of the entire analysis process a few years back. But how did things evolve with NFL teams? Of course, the Giants go on to win the Super Bowl in 2011. There's the article that comes out. I don't know if you want to touch on that quick,
sure.
because that certainly, I think, helped publicity a little bit.
Yeah, there was a guy called Reed. I was with John in training camp, and I was supposed to be meeting a guy called Reed Albergotti from the Wall Street Journal who was interested in Pro Football Focus. And I wasn't saying a lot. I wasn't saying that we were working with the Giants. I was being very circumspect. But I can remember that they had to work out a tight end, and John wanted me to meet some of the player personnel guys. So he held me in the office, and I had to cancel on my appointment with Reed Albergotti. And I think Reed twigged that there was something going on. I swear I never told him anything, and he would back that up. But he somehow got wind of the fact that we were providing the Giants information, and being the good journalist that he is, he chased the story and chased the story and chased the story. And he chased it to the point that when the Giants were in the Super Bowl on the media day, he hunted down John Berger, of all people, in the stands and said, "Are you using these guys, Pro Football Focus?" And John said, "Look, I can't comment." He said, "Let me have a conversation with Jerry Reese, the general manager,
right,
and see whether Jerry's okay with me having a conversation with you." And I really appreciate the fact that Jerry said yes, which was a very, very bold move to make, in my opinion, before the Super Bowl. Because on the Saturday before the Super Bowl, 2011, the story came out. I think it's Giants go long for number cruncher, which was on the very front of the Wall Street Journal. And then there was a picture of me on page 2. I still remember we needed a picture, and my nanny at the time, my wife was out, and we had the nanny, and the nanny took this photograph of me lounging in front of my bookshelf.
Wow, not at the gym? I figured it would be in
spandex. No,
I
would have pumped up for it if only I'd known. But
we have better pictures on file now, straight out of Neal's home gym. So luckily we've evolved there as well.
So it was a terrible picture, but the story ran in the Wall Street Journal. It was a very good story for us. And I will always, always appreciate the Giants for this, because it's one thing to be able to say, we've used data from an outside source, and this source is in the UK, when you've won the Super Bowl, when you can do no wrong. But I can imagine the fallout from that particular article if the Giants had lost.
Right.
You know, to your Patriots, Steve.
Not me. I'm a neutral, unbiased analyst.
Tom Brady's biggest ever fan. And
just a Tom Brady fan. Like your Dan Marino fan. That's what we'll say.
Yeah. And if they'd have come out, I could imagine the fallout. You know, I could imagine, look, people taking the Mickey out of them. Well, of course they lost because they went to some random guy in the UK listen to the English guy. And we did provide them with a ton of information, and we worked very hard on it. And I really appreciated them doing it. I took a lot of courage for them to do that, and I appreciate Jerry and I appreciate John doing the thing. And on the back of that, we got 3 or 4 clubs phoning us up, of which we converted probably 2 or 3 who are really good customers now. And from then we've gone on to 27 NFL teams, all paying significant amounts of money for what's not just the data, but a service that we provide now, a service in terms of not just data, but tools, helping with translations, a whole host of things that we provide for those clubs. So it started with the Giants, and that article was huge for us in terms of moving to the next level.
Nothing sums up our evolution to me more than the first time we went to the NFL Combine. I think it was 2013, and we probably had, at that time, the 2 or 3 clients that we had. And I think you phoned me up a week before and said, all right, just come out. We'll see what's going on. We had pretty much no plan, maybe 1 or 2 meetings set up. Didn't know a ton of people there, and there was 3 of us, and I think Brian, our sales guy, him and I had to split time because we only had 1 room booked, and we didn't know anybody. Like I said, it was just, let's just see if we could talk to people and get some meetings, and we snuck a couple meetings with agents and some personnel people, but it was a lot different than, say, this past NFL Combine when you have 2 full meeting rooms booked solid from Tuesday through Saturday, and there's overflow meetings in the hallway because NFL teams are really banging down the door to go talk to you because they want to know, what else do you have for us? Because I feel like it has become just this necessary staple for teams because we provide so much information in a well-organized fashion that, hey, they just want to know what's the next thing you guys are going to provide because, that's our edge. That's kind of our edge going into the week. So that evolution has been quite fun. That first NFL Combine to, say this past year, because that's kind of when the NFL does a lot of their business.
Yeah, and that's another guy that's been crucial to the whole story, Brian Hall, who's done a phenomenal job. Brian's our sales guy.
He'll be on here as well.
And that's great. And Brian has always driven for that more professional approach. I think we had 45 meetings booked over the course of that period. And these weren't just like 5-minute little see-yous. They were 1-2 hour meetings that went on that Brian had carefully done to show them how our new all blocking that we're doing and our new product PFF Ultimate, which is effectively a new tool that we're building that allows you to answer any question on football and utilize data from multiple sources. So we were doing that, and yes, we've come a long way. From being mostly on my knees, begging, people to just have begging agents to have a meeting with us, to the NFL teams really, I think, finding it a staple for them to come and visit with us as far as what's the new thing that we've got this year. And we've always tried to do that, which is, okay, so this is this year, but that's this year. This is just, let's roll that off. What are we doing next year? What are we doing next season? What's the new thing that we're doing? Without ever losing track of the fact you can't compromise on the stuff that you've already nailed down.
Right.
You can't compromise on that in terms of trying to find what the next thing is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so now we're backtracking just a little bit back to 2012. That's when I joined on. Full-time. Big move. Let's focus on that for the next hour. No. 2011, I came on part-time. 2012, I'm full-time. So I was the 5th or 6th full-time employee. 2013, we continue to add on. 2014, that's the big move. So let's get into the whole story about your boss, our boss, Chris Collinsworth, because you do actually have to report to someone now. How does Chris Collinsworth fall into the whole story? 2014, I believe it was, right? Summer of 2014. Explain how that whole thing goes down. Okay,
I'm going to explain it from my standpoint, because Chris does a much, much better job of explaining it, and I think you've got him on later on.
We do. We'll have Chris.
We've got the big boss, and we've got the raconteur.
He does tell a good story.
He does tell it. He's somewhat good at it. As he keeps on pointing out to me, he's paid to be good at this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, from my standpoint, we know sort of who's doing stuff on the website. So somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, Chris Collinsworth just bought a subscription," and that's sort of exciting for us, Chris Collinsworth's big name. And the next thing I know, I get an email from Chris Collinsworth saying, "Oh, just been on, bought a subscription, really like your stuff. Here's my number. Can you give me a call and talk to me more?" So I've never exactly played it cool. So as fast as I can get there to make the
start dialing immediately.
And phone Chris, and we have a conversation. It's a good conversation, and I think Chris is intrigued. And from then, we have multiple conversations over the next few weeks. It feels like it's a hotline between Cincinnati and Luton, which is where I lived at the time. And we probably have one conversation a day for a while. And out of the blue then, Chris makes an offer and says he'd like to buy the company. He'd like to become the majority shareholder in the company. And over that period of time, you know, the big thing is when you're doing stuff like this, it's how does everybody else feel about it? So we have conversations and also, is this the right person? You know, is this a person that, you know, where these things go wrong is if you get the wrong person to come in who's got the wrong ethos of the company.
And you'd had not necessarily a million other offers, but there'd always been internal discussion, your own thoughts about how do I move forward with the company? Yeah. What's the next step, right?
There'd been, and this has never, ever, ever been a money-making exercise, Steve. You know that. This is really about providing. It's really about being involved in football, and it's providing employment for people who want to be involved in football. And it just felt that Chris had exactly the right ethos. And of many of the decisions that we have made, one of the best ones, and I know I'm going to be slightly sycophantic now, Chris has just come on board and he's exceeded my expectations by an order of magnitude. He's been phenomenal. And one of the greatest things about this move has been the facility to work with Chris.
Right.
He's just got a passion for football. If people think that he takes his job anything other than the most seriously for one moment, what really intrigued me was the amount of time he takes to prepare for a game and how seriously he takes it. He's up till whatever time it needs to be the night before games, making sure he knows who's who, what's going on, what level these players are at. And that shows up in the broadcast.
Right.
Every single time that shows up. So Chris has that mantra of continuous improvement. How do I get better? All of the things that we talked about within PFF, he's taken that culture on board and then just brought another order of magnitude to it. He's taken it to the next level. So it's been a phenomenally positive move for us. And it's been a phenomenally positive move for me.
I didn't realize that either until I kind of saw his work week close up as well. It's like as soon as the game's over Sunday night, he's instantly. He's like Coach Belichick. It's like we're on to whatever the next team is, and he's Monday morning focused on, all right, I got to learn everything about these next two teams. Sometimes now we've got 2 games a week for half the season, so it's pretty much double the work. So I do certainly have a new respect for the time and effort that he puts in there. So he essentially buys the company in 2014. That's a game changer for us because at the time we have about 12, 13 full-time employees, I think it was.
And 13 NFL teams.
And 13 NFL teams.
Yeah.
So now we've more than doubled our NFL team output in those few years. Employees have quadrupled, I'd say, full-time.
The big thing that Chris did was right off from the word go, he came to me and he said, this is in 2014. The deal finishes in August, sometime late August. And he said, Neil, do you think we can do the college season?
Yes.
And the answer is, yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. We probably won't get all the games done every week, but we'll get them done before the Super Bowl.
Right.
And we did it. We did all 870 FBS games. And I think that was a great thing from both perspectives. It was a great thing from Chris investing in that and having the confidence in us to put the money forward to be able to do that. And it was a great thing for us to immediately deliver something to him. That's always been one of the other mantras within PFF. We deliver.
Right.
When we say we're going to do something, we do it. And I think that's one of the things that the NFL teams like about us, that everybody that works within PFF has to understand that the one thing that you cannot compromise on, deliver. When we're going to do something, we're going to do it, and nothing can change that. And I think it was great for Chris to see that right off the bat.
Yeah, and it was amazing and we had already done a lot of groundwork for what it would take to do college, and we had some of the process in place, but it was just, getting like the okay to say, okay, let's
Oh, I should have just realised, Steve, it was just a question of flicking the switch and it was going to happen. Yeah, I should have just talked to you all along.
I was pushing for it for many, many years, and that for some reason you listen to Chris. I guess money talks, I guess, because he could actually fund the whole thing.
I was going to say, if you'd have decided to put your hand in your pocket, Steve, and say, here's the money for it, yeah.
I could not do that. So what is that? So 2014, you're still over in England, and now you're in Cincinnati. So that was part of the deal. How did you end up coming over here? What was that like on your family? What is that whole thing looking like for you when Chris gets involved?
Well, the first and most important thing was that there was an element of just being able to say thank you to my wife, because in 2012 I went and made this I had this conversation with her, and it was a fairly important conversation in the history of PFF, because if this conversation hadn't happened the way it happened, we probably wouldn't be here now. So in 2012, we're doing okay. We're not making a lot of money, but we're starting to make a little bit of money. And I have a pretty good consultancy business running in the UK. It's earning good money. And I go to her and I say, Claire, I'd like to give this football gig a go full-time. I'd like to go full-time. I'd like to give up my consultancy business. It means you won't be able to give up work, because she was just about to give up work. We probably won't be able to have a holiday for 2 or 3 years. And if I'm really, really lucky and everything goes to plan, I might earn about 20% of the amount of money that I was going to earn previously. So clearly I am the best salesman in the world. Or alternatively, and you can choose from the option A, I'm the best salesman in the world, or B, I've got the best wife in the world. Which might not be a good thing for you, actually. It's all clear. So she said, that's what you want to do. That's what you want. So number one, it was great to be able to have her here. She's enjoyed the move tremendously. Chris has been fantastic. The boys have enjoyed coming to Cincinnati. And Chris was great right from the word go. He said, I'd like you to bring your wife. I'd like you to come across and listen, you can live anywhere in the US you want. Obviously, we need you in the US, but I'd like to show you why Cincinnati is a great place to live, and I love it. I've loved it from when we moved here. Everybody's been really, really friendly, and I say this and I mean it literally. We made more friends in 6 months in Cincinnati than we did in 19 years, living about 30 miles north of London. So it's been a fantastic experience for us all.
Yeah, so then you became essentially the tour guide for Cincinnati once you moved, and trying to get me and some of the other guys over there, because this whole company, we talked about Skype as the office. That was it. I mean, you and I had met a handful of times. Mm-hmm. A few of us hadn't even met in person over the years. We had worked 2, 3, 4, 5 years together. So you brought, I came over to Cincinnati. Rick came over. Rick was another one of the early adopters of PFF, early guys that wore many, many hats. I don't know if you want to talk about Rick real quick, because he's now entrenched here as well. But you pulled people literally from all over the world to come here to Cincinnati and kind of have a bit of a home base.
It's just, what's Rick's background? He's been a chiropractor, he was a hockey coach, he's worked in a wine warehouse.
Senior editor at PFF.
How did I know? I have no idea that this guy was going to be one of the best product managers I've ever seen. And I've worked with some good people at the high end in the industry, and Rick's been utterly phenomenal. He started off as an unpaid editor and did a brilliant job at that. The man who goes without sleep, as we say, you could get him at end. He does not need to sleep. I think he started sleeping now. The word on the street is that he has started to sleep.
He is getting old, so maybe it's better.
It's all this training he's been doing at Gainesville. All the training,
That's Neal's home gym. We call it Gainesville, and that's the other subcult that we have going on at PFF, where everybody gets in and you have to train. You got to train with Neal.
Well, yeah, the only problem is I wish I hadn't got that going now, because now everybody's outlifting me by double and triple, and Steve's starting to need dumbbells that I don't have in the gym anymore, which is going to cost me a fortune.
That's the PFF way, right? You started and we all take it to new levels. That's the way it's been.
Yeah, I was never going to need a hundy, Steve. I was never going to need the 100-pound dumbbells, but thanks to you, we now need them. So
need to invest.
I need to invest. But
over here.
yeah, let's get back onto the track, which is Rick has just he's the example of why PFF is why it is. It's the ultimate meritocracy. I've always looked upon it. It doesn't matter where you start. It's what you do. And Rick, I think everybody knows is with Khaled being still in the UK, Rick is the my number two guy in this country. He's taken everything that I started to a completely different level. He's just taken it and made it better and better. And he started off, I can remember the conversation. Rick wanted to join us full time, and we had a conversation along the lines of, yeah, of course you can. And I can't remember what we were paying at the time, but it wasn't very much at all.
Right.
And I said, well, yeah, of course you can start, but we can pay you this. And Rick said, well, that's like 15 grand less than I'm earning. Can you just give me a little bit more? I said, can't do it. Not that I don't like you, but just can't. We haven't got that amount of money. So a couple of months later, Rick came back and he said, look, I want to do it. I just want to. If the offer's still on the table, then I'd like to do it. And he's just worked on, and he's just been a shooting star within the organisation, guy that everybody respects for work ethic, intelligence, the ability to talk to people, to put processes in place. He's been phenomenal, and it's just another example of people starting within PFF at potentially a low base and then moving on to great things. Because what we do is we give everybody a facility. Everybody has the facility to take it to the next level. Show us what you can do. And if you can do that, then we'll find a place for you.
Right. And he's another guy, just did player participation slowly and poorly. He was analysis.
He was the worst player participation. It's that bit about if we'd have taken Rick. I've just given him a glowing resume, but I have to tell you the downside is if we were just employing him as a player participation analyst, he would have been gone a long, long time ago. He was awful.
So I don't even know if I would make it into the company nowadays, because at the time we only had a handful of people wanting to work for the company. Mm-hmm. Now we have hundreds and
thousands, yeah.
And we pick a handful out of that. I don't think I would have made it. Rick you never would have found us.
Well,
we never would have made it through player participation back then.
That's true, but that's the nature of what we've done. We've always said we want to bring people on the basis of a meritocracy. And what you understand is that if somebody's prepared to go through that, and you went through it, Steve, whether you liked it, whether you were particularly good at it, and actually you were pretty good at it, if a little slow like me. They were accurate but slow. When people go through that, and we did it for nothing, you did it for nothing, right. Rick did it for nothing. You know that when those people actually start to get paid, they're not going to slack off.
Right.
They're not going to be the sort of guys who are going to say, okay, I've done the work now I've got paid, I can, the first contract scenario in the NFL. Yeah. Once you get the first, that's it, and you go away and you never bother trying again. Those guys are not the sort of guys, after they've gone through that process,
right,
to ever slack off.
Yeah, that's been a key part of our continued growth at PFF. So with Chris on boards 2014, 2015, obviously as a company, a couple changes had to be made. We had to evaluate our old premium stats product, which we realized was extremely valuable with NFL teams, with television broadcasts, with just massive companies. Had to make the somewhat unpopular decision to pull back premium stats, because for $27 at the time, it was, we knew NFL teams would be willing to spend thousands. We knew other people would be willing to spend quite a lot. So, unpopular business decision at the time. We've continued to try to add value back, pulling from what we used to give away in the premium stats, and I think we've gotten to a pretty good place now going into 2017 where we're giving away or presenting a pretty nice product of information from fantasy to general NFL to draft. We've kind of come full circle with that now that we've been able to grow the business. We have PFF Elite, we have PFF Edge coming out this year. Can you discuss any of that whole process and what we've been able to go through there?
Yeah, one of the other key investors that we've had is a guy called Jack Cassidy, very big in the Cincinnati community around here. And Jack says two things to me, said a lot of things to me that have been really useful, but there's two that I remember, stick with me. One is business is about the attraction and retention of profitable customers. And the second thing that Jack talks about is about products being good, better, best. And I feel that what we've been moving towards is a good, better, best scenario. We need to provide a really great service to the guys who just don't have the money to be able to do that. And I think what we've done is we've turned that around with our Twitter feed. I think if anybody wants to just look at our Twitter feed these days, and if anybody comes and says that isn't good value to me as a football fan, the amount of information that we provide on a regular basis, the amount of football news that we provide insights on, free of charge for absolutely nothing, then I'd be disappointed that we're not providing a good service. So the good is the free service that we provide. For those people who want more, particularly from a fantasy perspective, we now have a product called Edge. It's not just about fantasy, but predominantly it's fantasy, but there's also the player grades we're wrapping in there and your draft stuff, Steve, and we're going to really uprate your draft work as part of that package. So that's a $40 package, which we feel is unbelievable value because all of those parts, if you'd pulled them in separately, would have been about $80 worth of value. So we've pulled them all together and we've put them down into one package. And then for the guys who are really into the data and want to dig in, maybe a DFS guy or somebody who just loves football at a different level, we've got a new product called Elite. That's a $200 value, but again, it's for the people who really, really want to understand football at a different level and want to do their own digging around. So our good, better, best, and it also to allow us to work with them.
It's live here, so we've got phones going off, Neal. That's a fine. We're going in the fine box with the phone going off, and that's a big fine for Neal. Phone goes off mid-interview.
I had to pick it up as well. It was the boss.
Okay, fine. Chris is calling, ruining the entire interview. That's okay, though.
I'm not a professional like you, Steve. I don't know. My job isn't to switch my phone off in the middle of interviews.
Okay, fine. So we're going to keep this as is. We will not edit it.
Okay.
The raw emotion of you answering the phone call from your buddy Chris.
Well, you're going to have to edit it because you're missing the bit where I spoke to Chris.
I know, I did. I did cut that out. Anyway, so we've got these products coming back, and I think we made this decision as a company to say, look, we have, some very valuable stuff that we can give back, and we want to make them at reasonable price points, and we're really excited about where we are right now. It's taken us a few years, I think, to just get a really good feel for where we stand with our fans, with everybody that's, especially those who have stuck with us through the years, the early adopters of PFF. So we're definitely really excited about where we are right now with these products coming back out, right?
Oh, listen. The goal is always, and it's been with what it is with the NFL teams. You know what I'm like with the NFL teams. The plan is always to hold the price for as long as you can and drive up the value. The plan is to do that. If you are running any business and you are looking to the next year, then you either need to be doing things cheaper, you need to be improving your process, or you need to be keeping the thing the same and driving up value. And that's what we intend to do. That's what we do with the NFL teams. That's why we have a very good reputation with them, and why we need to start or we need to get better with our customers at getting that value proposition right. And that's what we're going to do. We put a value proposition on the table, and then we drive up the value from inside that. We've put down a number of things as to what people will get within that product. I'd love to deliver more than what we've actually said. It's another mantra, another PFF mantra. Under promise and over deliver. That's,
That is the plan going forward. That is our promise to all of our fans who we thank. This podcast's really taken off, Neil. I even got you to download iTunes so that you can listen to it, which is great.
And you know my dislike of Apple in general.
Yes, you are the walking billboard for Microsoft with multiple surfaces floating through the office at home. I want to talk a little bit about the future of PFF. Where are we going? So just lay out the business plan for the next 5 years. Now, what's the plan for the future? Like, where are we going right now? We've made great growth over these last 10 years, the last few years, without giving away everything that we might be doing. But what's the quick plan for us in the future?
Yes. Quick plan. So what we're doing is we want to continue to grow our NFL reach. Clearly, we're at the point now where there's only a few more teams to pick up, and I would suspect we'll pick up at least 2 or 3 of those before the start of the season. But what we need to do is provide better value. So the real plan at that level is, as I said, a new tool that we've been building, that our IT team are building, called PFF Ultimate. And we set them the exam question, which is to be able to answer any question about football and then articulate that in any format they want, any format the user wants, which is either charts or graphs or NGS tracking data for our NFL teams, or just by video cut-ups for our NFL teams and some of our media customers who have access. That's a big ask, but the guys, we demonstrated that at the Combine. We demonstrated sort of the Draft 1 at the Combine, and that's a big thing for us. Obviously, we'll then take that down to our college customers as well. We're really pushing on with the college marketplace at the moment there. We started much, much later, obviously, in 2014, so we haven't got quite the traction that we've got at the NFL level, but that will continue to grow. And then, obviously, this year we're starting with, we had a pilot last year with high school, and this year we're starting with high school. It's highly likely that what we'll be doing is focusing on the Cincinnati area. As you know, Steve, it's a phenomenal high school.
Oh, Friday nights.
Friday nights over here. Ohio and high school football is a phenomenal place to be. And we'll be focusing on some of the key teams in the Cincinnati area, working with some partners to drive that and then growing that out across the marketplace. So the bottom line is we want to be involved in football data from the NFL level all the way down to the high school level. Every league in the world, we've got the products to be able to do that. If people want us to grade the Spring League, we'll grade the Spring League. If people want us to grade the CFL, we'll grade the CFL. And therefore, we have one consistent, holistic process across all forms of football. And that's not going to take that long. That'll be upon us within the next year or so.
And that's just taking like you said, you kind of create stuff and then let people run with it, but your expertise is managing those projects, setting out expectations, setting out realistic guidelines and deadlines, and
I'm a project manager by trade. That's what I am. I'm a business process expert. I'm a project manager by trade. And given the fact that you guys have spoken, I'm not allowed to do any more grading and any more player participation work.
We have to get some kind of value out of you, so we'll stick with the project managing. I got a couple more questions for you. Along the way, how many people said you can't do what you're doing? And this is the part that I always kind of chuckle at. I love when somebody tells you we can't do something. Like right now I'm going to tell you there's no way we're going to actually grade every high school player, right? Like that's not going to happen?
Oh, it will happen.
Oh, jeez.
It will happen. Listen, there was an interesting thing, and Peter King had an interview with Brandon Bean, and it was Sean McDermott was the coach of the Buffalo Bills, was trying to sell Brandon Bean on going up there, and he sent him this book, and the quote out of the book was, "If your goals aren't scary, they're not big enough." And
sounds right.
And that's really the crucial thing. It's you don't get really big things by setting small goals. You can't leave yourself short. what's to say you can't do something? It's always been something that's been drummed into me for, probably later in my life than I like. But it's something that I believe passionately in, which is, what's the worst thing that can happen? If you set yourself a big goal, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's also another interesting quote, because Steve gets me with his quote things all the time. He gets bombarded with them. But there's a not too reputable person, and actually it meant a lot more when he was more reputable. He is now Oscar Pistorius, the legless runner.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that he once said before he'd been, I think, did he get acquitted for shooting?
I lost track of what happened.
I lost track of the South African OJ.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, what he said, which meant a lot to me at the time, was the only losers in a race are the ones in the stands, the ones who were watching and not participating. Didn't try. And those are the things. What's the worst that can happen by trying?
You make a lot of guys watch a lot of high school film. That's the worst thing that can happen.
Again, people don't have to do anything in life. What's the only thing you have to do in life, Steve? What's the only thing
you have to... Pay taxes?
Nope.
What is it? Breathe a little bit?
Nope. Die.
Oh, that's it?
That's it. That's the only thing you have to do in life.
What a sour note to end on.
But it's not a sour note, because it's saying that life is about choices. There's a consequence to those choices, but that's what life's about.
So we're moving forward.
Yep.
High school's on the radar. Trying to master the NFL, continue to grow the NFL, grow college, expand on these couple products, and that's where we're going. That's where we're going for the future of PFF. I got one last question.
Okay.
Which NFL coach best describes your managerial style?
I'll answer this question only on the basis that you answer the question after me.
Uh-oh. My managerial style?
No, who you think is my managerial styles most like. But I will run with, and this is probably going to be a little bit of a surprise, I think. I would have said two coaches potentially that came out of Cincinnati. One is Mike Zimmer.
That's not bad.
And one is Hugh Jackson. I think they're both emotional guys who believe in stuff and who really push for things. They can be a little bit abrupt at times, because they believe that the end result is more important than necessarily making sure that everybody's feelings are looked after. I think both of them have a belief that there's an end result and an end product, and whatever you pay to get there is worth that price. And I think that's a little bit of me. I'd like to think that I'd be as successful as those guys at some stage. They've both done some fantastic stuff. But yeah, maybe those two guys.
I like the Zimmer one.
Yeah.
I think that kind of plays, even though he's always at the podium downplaying PFF in general. But that's a different story. That's okay.
That's his job.
He's the head coach. I would do it too.
Of course.
I make that point all the time.
Yeah,
if I was the head coach, I would do it too.
You've got to protect your players.
So there's a little bit of Parcells in you a little bit too? Right?
Yeah, I was thinking couldn't ones.
Parcells, Belichick, just do your job, and we'll talk about it later and stuff like that. But you do have the emotional highs and lows that maybe a Belichick doesn't.
I'm an emotional person, and that's why I identify with you a lot. You gets very emotional about things, and I think that's a good thing. Passionate, yeah, absolutely. If you can't be passionate about the thing you love, then what's the point?
So I think I can agree with you on the Zimmer part of it, because like we were talking about it the other day. Nobody at PFF likes when we see Neil Hornsby's calling, except maybe Khaled. I mean, you guys talk every day, right? Like mother-daughter, you gotta check in. But everybody else, it's like, oh boy, Neil's calling. What went wrong? What percentage of those calls would you say are on the positive end when you're calling me? What percentage are we at?
Well, I told Claire about this podcast, so I said, and do you know what her response was? She said, what do you think they're saying? I said, about 1 to 9, 1 positive to 9 bollockins or whatever it was.
That sounds about right.
And she said, well, they should work harder then. They're not doing a very good job if they're getting 9 bollockins to one positive straw.
Wow. Tough love from Claire. I take back all the nice things I said about her earlier as well, blaming us for your emotional highs and lows when you're going to call us on Skype. Most of the time, it's to make sure that things are in order, and every now and again, it's like hey, good job, buddy, good job. That was great. But those are all worth it, Neal. That's what it's all about. You're trying to make guys do their job. I couldn't give you a Pete Carroll or anything like that. I can't give you a player's coach because it's not all sunshine and rainbows over here all the time. But I like to think that we're always moving forward. The company's always continued to grow. I'm excited about where the future is going, and I think that's the important thing. So I like Zimmer. I think that's a good comp. Anything else you want to just hit the fans with as we kind of wrap things up here?
I just think that we're going in a really positive direction. I honestly, I said this to you before we started. I said this in the gym this morning, Steve.
While you were working out.
I was at 400 reps of core work or something like that. I said this. I've never ever been as positive about the direction of Pro Football Focus as I am at the moment. Things are going really well. NFL teams are signing up, and are happy with the service that we're providing. I'm really happy with the new way that the Twitter feed is going, with the fact of the content that Sam Monson's done a tremendous job on. They're driving the new news feed. So I'm feeling tremendously optimistic about what we're doing. I really feel that we'll hit those goals, and we'll be sitting over a drink at some stage in the future, Steve, when we've done whatever it is, 10,000 high school games. And we'll be sitting there and we'll say, can you remember the time when you told me that you couldn't do it? And, we'll do it. It's just a question. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And really that's the fun of the job, isn't it? If we knew where the end was going to be, what would be the point in doing it?
And knowing the history, it'll probably be sooner rather than later that we have all of those high school games done. Because along the way, it's been, you can't grade every player on every play in the NFL. You can't do it for college. You can't do player participation. And somehow we've found a way to do it. So that's about going to wrap it up with the Godfather, Neil Hornsby, the founder of Pro Football Focus. We're having a lot of fun right now going back, rehashing the history of PFF. So Neil is just the very beginning. We'll have interviews with many of the other cast of characters that he mentioned. Of course, Chris Collinsworth, we'll be talking with him along the way as well. And we appreciate all the feedback we've been getting for the podcast. It's been record-setting couple of months for the podcast. We appreciate all of that support. We hope you guys continue to download, listen. Be sure to get to iTunes, give the old 5-star review. That helps get the word out even further. So stay with us all spring and summer as we go through the history of PFF. And if you guys have any other questions that we didn't touch on here, hit me up at PFF_Steve, or you can go to Neil directly at PFF_Deal on Twitter. So there you have it, the Godfather, Neil Hornsby, founder of PFF. Sam, what'd you think?
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff in there. My favorite stuff, though, was talking about him and Ian first devising this whole system and him trying to teach Ian football. When you asked that question, I was thinking the same thing. How did that function? And you realize that it only functioned because Neil had a reasonably decent understanding of the technical side himself. Like, if Neil hadn't had a pretty good grounding in IT, the whole company would have ground to a halt right there. There's no way those two would have been able to communicate well enough to actually get this thing off the ground.
So if this was your idea, Sam, this thing never happens.
Yeah, no, not even close.
Yeah,
I'd be trying to teach Ian football, and Ian would be trying to teach me how to flatten a database, and we'd all be... that's as far as we'd ever get.
Always just flatten the database, Sam. It is interesting because with Neil, he had a very specific skill set that was perfect for the company, because we all have the passion for football. I think we all have big ideas and big dreams, but as you said, he had some level of IT knowledge, ridiculous ability to project manage and organize and stay extremely focused on whatever the task at hand is, almost to a fault sometimes. Sometimes you're like, hey, Neil, I got this great idea. He's like, sorry, no, I got this one thing I'm doing, and that's it right now. We'll talk later. But that focus, that extreme focus was huge for the company. So what's on tap next? We got a few other guys around the company, kind of like that next step of people that were around your era. We'll have Khaled. We'll talk to Ian, who we touched on a little bit. What else should people be looking forward to?
Yeah, well, next up is I think the early core PFF group, the guys that founded it, the guys that really got it up and running as some kind of sensible enterprise. We've heard me and you talk about it. We heard Neal talk about it a bit there. Khaled, Ben, Ian, the guys. We at one point had these AGMs, PFF AGMs, basically out of Neal's living room for a couple of seasons. So it'll be fun talking to those guys and getting to hear that early story. Then we're just going to go through it, I think, a bit chronologically. Bring in your era, you, Rick, Nathan, the next wave of guys, and just work our way through to the big boss man, Chris Collinsworth, and the takeover. Takeover sounds a bit more hostile than I was planning there.
It was a friendly takeover, a very friendly takeover. And Neal, of course, spoke glowingly of Chris's involvement. And I think that's something we could speak to, Sam. When Neal said, Neal did not take lightly his turning over the company. There were many potential deals on the table throughout the years. There were many potential buyers, I believe, on the table throughout the years. He took working with Chris extremely seriously because, again, we turned down a lot of different offers until we got the right one, and getting someone that was of like mind who had the same passion of football that helped grow the company.
Yeah, I mean, Neal had always said that he wasn't interested in selling the company, all the way along. Like you said, there have been bits and pieces that it came up every now and again, people wanting to invest, and he'd always turned it down. And suddenly, whatever Chris managed to tell him on the phone, those first couple of conversations, was enough to convince him that this was to change that ethos completely. And this is a guy that you could get on board with and partner with and move forward.
And that will be a part of the entire story when we do get to interview Chris. So that'll wrap it up for part 2 of the history of PFF podcast. We hope you guys are enjoying this little run through. If you guys have any questions, be sure to hit me up on Twitter at PFF_Steve. Find Sam on Twitter at PFF_Sam. And if you have direct questions for the Godfather himself at PFF_Neal. We do appreciate everybody tuning in, listening, helping us set records here with the PFF podcast. And if you guys haven't checked out those new products on ProFootballFocus.com, PFF Edge and PFF Elite, I promise you guys will love them. If you're a fantasy fan, if you're just an NFL fan, if you're a draft fan, if you just love football in general, there is something for everyone with these new products. And for those fans that were a little upset with us pulling some stats back the last couple of years, these new packages are for you because we're bringing a lot back, putting a lot back on the table for this new era of PFF. So we hope you enjoy it. Check those out at ProFootballFocus.com. And until next week, everyone, have a good one.